So Impact Wrestling was back for another episode on AXS TV last night, and we have a greater picture as to what is going on. Firstly, with Kenny Omega's plan. We're going to touch on Kenny Omega's plans in Impact Wrestling going forward, but we have a bit of a better idea as to the Impact World Champion's plans with Impact going forward. Now, last night on Impact Wrestling, tensions, of course, were at an all-time high as the AEW World Champion, the AAA Mega Champion, and the new Unified Impact World Champion, Kenny Omega, his victory this past weekend at Rebellion was felt in full force. Now, in an effort to fix things, make things right, and bring the Impact World Championship back to an Impact Wrestling talent, Executive Vice President of Impact Wrestling Scott D'Amore issued a 6-way number one contenders match qualifier to determine who will rightfully become the next number one contender for Kenny Omega's now new Unified Impact World Championship. Now, Scott D'Amore announced that at Under Siege on Saturday, May 15, there will be a 6-way match. Whoever wins that match will be the next in line for Kenny Omega's Unified Impact World Championship. Now, to enter this 6-way matchup in 2 weeks, there will be 6 qualifying matches with the winners of each matches heading to Under Siege. Now, on last night's show, Chris Bay and Matt Cardona successfully punched their tickets into the match at Under Siege and will take part in this match. But a third match that was set to take place last night is still undetermined. Now, in last night's main event, Sami Callihan and Eddie Edwards, the old rivals that continued to fight over and over again, they've renewed their rivalry towards each other for a shot at becoming the next man added to the match in 2 weeks' time. Now, despite the back and forth exchanges between Sami Callihan and Eddie Edwards, the champion Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers, Doc Gallows and Carl Anderson, interrupted the match, causing both men an unfavorable outcome. As the brawl ensued, the Impact World Tag Team Champions Juice Robinson, and David Finlay ran down to the ring to even the odds for Callihan and Edwards. The Good Brothers and Omega cleaned house, showing Callihan and Edwards and Juice to the outside, in which everyone then turned into a bit of a mass brawl to close off Impact. Now, right after the show went off the air, Impact Wrestling then announced that Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers will be in action against Eddie Edwards and the Impact World Tag Team Champions New Japan Pro Wrestling's Juice at Under Siege in a couple of weeks' time. This past Sunday, of course, Juice retained their Impact World Tag Team Championships against the Good Brothers, so certainly is an interesting match going forward in a couple of weeks' time for Under Siege. Now, you would think, and I mentioned about the whole number one contender concept and who's going to be challenging Kenny Omega next, who's going to be challenging Kenny Omega going forward. You would think that given that Eddie Edwards is going to be in this match, Sami Callihan's going to probably be added to that 6-way number one contenders match at Under Siege. It's interesting. This is really interesting. The reason I say it's interesting is because, and we're going to touch on this in a second, because there had been some reports about Kenny Omega's plans going forward with Impact Wrestling being the Unified Impact World Champion, because obviously I think the biggest issue that AEW and Impact are having to figure out at the moment when it comes to Kenny Omega working for both promotions, he's an AEW contracted talent, but doing these commitments for both promotions, the biggest issue that they were trying to figure out is timings, isn't it? It's timings of, okay, what can he do at this time? Is he going to be here for this event? Is he going to be there for that pay-per-view and all that kind of stuff? Obviously, the thing that Impact have, a benefit that Impact has, is that everything is taped at once. They have these bulk TV tapings, which is why he was part of the TV tapings for What You Saw that aired last night on AXS TV. There had been reports by Dave Meltzer, and I know when it comes to the Meltzer haters, there were people like, see, he's not right all the time, and he's not. He's not right all the time, and don't get me wrong, I'm not maybe as critical of Dave Meltzer as some people are on social media, but I think some of the criticism he gets is absolutely justified, by the way. I really, really do. I think a lot of people, when it comes to Dave Meltzer, confuse his opinion for fact, and they confuse his opinion for backstage information or backstage scoops, whatever you want to call them, all that kind of stuff. So I take anything, to be honest, that Meltzer says with a pinch of salt. The same for Brian Alvarez as well, and that's no disrespect towards them at all. Obviously, I respect what they've done and they continue to do, but like any form of journalism, and this isn't specific to pro wrestling, this is specific to journalism in general, people have their biases. It's human nature to have their biases, so I'll leave it at that. My point being is that it was reported by Dave Meltzer, I think it was on Wrestling Observer Radio a couple of weeks ago, or last week or this week, the time, honestly, that Kenny Omega would be defending the World Championship at Under Siege. Now, we now know that's not the case. which is interesting because I think people thought he was going to get in a couple of championship defenses before he drops it, either at Slammiversary, maybe Bound for Glory in October. The reason I say get those championship defenses in, because if Kenny Omega just holds the Impact World Championship, say until Slammiversary, say he drops the title at Slammiversary to whoever. I don't know who it's going to be at this point. But say he drops the title at Slammiversary in July. If Kenny Omega doesn't defend the title between now and then, his title reign, as monumental as it is and as historic as it is, and the match he had against Rich Swann and it being an AEW wrestler that's holding the Unified Impact World Championship, all that kind of stuff, that's great. But if he doesn't have a title defense between now and then, you could question, like, what was that title reign? It was nothing really. It was on him, and it made the title look great because it was on Kenny Omega and all that kind of stuff. But realistically, what's it memorable for apart from being Kenny Omega being the world champion? There were no big title defenses, no big matches. And sometimes if you go back and look through the great title defenses, title reigns rather, in history, not just in Impact but in any company, WWE, wherever, what really makes them memorable is the defenses, is the matches that they had for the title, how they won it, and the matches they had throughout all that period of time. That's what makes a title reign really memorable in the eyes of, I think, most pro wrestling fans. So that is something that they're obviously going to have to look at when it comes to Kenny Omega. If he does drop the title in July, what is he doing between now and then? He's got to get those title defenses in. That's why I'm surprised that they're having the 6-man match here at Under Siege, because I felt that this would have been a really good opportunity to have someone that obviously maybe wasn't going to win the World Championship soon, maybe in the future, but it's certainly a way to elevate someone, get an Impact talent more over than they are now. Again, you have to remember that Kenny Omega isn't going to be around forever when it comes to Impact Wrestling. He's not. There is a finite time that Kenny Omega is going to be around in Impact Wrestling. That's just how this working relationship is going to work. So being that Kenny Omega is only going to be around for a select period of time, it's in Impact's best interest that they get as many different Impact talents, Impact contracted talents possible to be working with Kenny Omega to get them over, to get them to the next level. So even if it is a Kenny Omega versus, I know Chris Bay was added to that #1 contenders match at Under Siege, but if it was Kenny Omega versus Chris Bay at Under Siege, who's to say that Chris Bay, I don't think, would win that match, but the fact that Chris Bay would have a headline match, a big-time match on an Impact Plus event against a Kenny Omega for the World Championship, it doesn't hurt him realistically if he loses. I know people will say, well, he challenged for it in December and he's lost. If he loses again, does that hurt him? Do you get the Braun Strowman situation, all that kind of stuff? It's a point of discussion. I would agree with that, but what I would also say is that having Chris Bay versus Kenny Omega is very beneficial, not only for Chris Bay, but for Impact Wrestling in terms of people signing up to Impact Plus and people having interest, watching that match, all that kind of stuff. You can get a talent to the next level. And I think that would be the best thing to do. Obviously, that's not the direction that they're going in. They're going for the 6-man match. And don't get me wrong, this match is kind of insane on the face of it, that there's only 3 talents in this match that are actually Impact Wrestling talents. Obviously, you got the Good Brothers, Doc Gallows and Carl Anderson, and you got Eddie Edwards, and the rest of them. Kenny Omega's an AEW contracted talent. Finn Juice is a New Japan Pro Wrestling contracted talent. There's a lot of working relationships going on right now, and I'm going to be doing a video later today talking about WWE, because they're trying to get in on this whole working relationship situation now. They want to have the look that they're not willing to work with other companies, which is, by the way, it's not the look. They're not willing to work with other companies. That's just, unless it really benefits them. That's how WWE works. So I think the match, it's a spectacle. There's no doubt about it. I mean, again, you've got an AEW talent, an Impact Wrestling talent, and New Japan Pro Wrestling talents all in the same ring at the same time. If they build it around that way, then that can work. That can be really, really interesting. And if they build it as, this real monumental, all of these talents from all of these different promotions working together at the same time, that's interesting. That is really interesting, and that can be really exciting and fun to watch. And obviously, it can lead to other stuff. We know that more talents from New Japan are coming over to AEW and Impact Wrestling. Of course, I'm going to be doing videos on all of that, so don't worry about that. That's why I'm being vague in this video talking about that. There's certainly a lot of different really interesting propositions, really interesting propositions when it comes to that. So I'm excited for the main event. I am excited for this main event. I think Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers win. I don't see a scenario why they would lose. You could argue that maybe this puts Eddie Edwards in a situation for a future Unified Impact World Championship match. It's possible. It's possible. To be honest, when it came to FinJuice, I was surprised that they retained the Impact World Tag Team Championships at Rebellion. I felt that it was going to be a situation where they came in, did a couple of dates, won the titles, and then they'll drop them back to the Good Brothers. So I was surprised to see them continue holding on to them. I think it's great because I think it shows that this relationship between Impact and New Japan is going to continue going on. And it does open the door for more talents to come in, like we saw yesterday. Possibly for an Okada sometime down the line too. Obviously, we know the names that are coming into the X Division as well. So it's exciting. That is exciting. But I think the outcome has to be Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers winning, right? And I think maybe in the same vein that I've just said that maybe it opens the door for Kenny Omega to be facing Eddie Edwards for the Impact World Championship in the future, I think realistically Eddie Edwards is probably in this match to take the fall. Obviously, you could see FinJuice pinning the Good Brothers. They've done it a couple of times at this point, and I just don't see how the Omega and the Good Brothers losing, how that would be beneficial to building up Kenny Omega as the Impact World Champion. You've got to have this guy feel like nobody can beat him. And the reason you have to make it feel like that is because eventually when someone does defeat Kenny Omega on the Impact Wrestling roster, it elevates them from here to here. And then you've got a big star on your hand for Impact Wrestling. You can actually build the company around for the next few years going forward. It's smart booking. So at this point, you're going to have to get the heat on Kenny Omega. You're going to have to continue building him up, and the Good Brothers build them up as well by proxy of just being close to Kenny Omega at that time. So I think that's probably the outcome there. I think Eddie Edwards is going to be taking the fall, if you will, in that match, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I did mention about Kenny Omega and future plans for him going forward. I did want to touch on this as well. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, Dave Meltzer reported on the Wrestling Observer Radio talking about future plans for Kenny Omega as the Impact World Champion. Now, at the time, because this was a few days ago, they mentioned that Kenny Omega was going to be defending the championship at least 2 more times, at Under Siege, possibly Against All Odds, and at Slammiversary as well. So that would possibly be 3 times. Now, obviously, we now know he's not defending the title at Under Siege. He's probably, I think now, giving the lay of the land, watching Impact on AXS TV last night, they're going to have the #1 contenders match at Under Siege. They didn't mention when that #1 contendership was going to be for. I would assume it's probably for Against All Odds in June, and then we go to Slammiversary in July. As I mentioned earlier on in the video, I think the critical thing for this Kenny Omega Impact World Championship reign, it's defenses. It's having a memorable reign. It's not just resting on the laurels, if you will, of, okay, we had a really monumental moment. Kenny Omega won the Unified Impact World Championship. He's the AEW World Champion and the AAA Mega Champion. Isn't that great? What a moment. And then he doesn't do anything with it until, say, Slammiversary, if he drops it then or whatever. That's not memorable. They now have to capitalize on the momentum. They have to continue the momentum, and they have to have him do regular title defenses. They stressed that going in to Impact Rebellion last weekend, is that the champion was going to fulfill all these commitments, whether it was Rich Swann or Kenny Omega. They can't just because it's Kenny Omega not do that. They have to live up to the promise, and they're not going to be defending the title Under Siege. So it makes sense to me that it would be Against All Odds and then Slammiversary. And Slammiversary, in the same vein that it was last year, I think it's shaping up to be Impact's biggest event this year. I know traditionally people would say that is going to be Bound for Glory. That's Impact Wrestling's WrestleMania and all that kind of stuff. But look, last year Slammiversary was a far bigger show than Bound for Glory. The reason it was far bigger is because there was so much intrigue and interest going into it, because you had these former WWE stars coming over, or the former Impact Wrestling stars returning, all that kind of stuff. It was a really interesting event, and it had a lot of people buzzing and talking about it. It did far better business in terms of the buy rate on Fight TV and in terms of social media metrics than Bound for Glory did a few months later in October as well. And I think that's going to be the same this year, because you've got the same sense of intrigue and interest of these former WWE stars coming over, the former Impact Wrestling stars returning. Kenny Omega's going to be on the card as well. Arguably, I mean, the way things are lining up, now you've got the Good Brothers under contract as well, and all of those guys that did return last year, they're still under contract, the majority of them with Impact Wrestling. I know there's a couple of injuries there in the likes of Eric Young and Heath, but Impact Wrestling arguably can put on a better card than they could around the same time last year. So this Slammiversary, to be honest, if I'm Impact Wrestling, I'm looking at it saying, look, He did great business last year. There was a ton of interest and a ton of intrigue. We've probably got bigger stars at this point under contract. We've got Kenny Omega. We've got these other stars that are going to be coming over, because there are going to be at least one. There is going to be at least one or two of these names coming over from WWE. We've got the New Japan relationship as well. We've got a relationship with AEW. There is so much they can do going into July for Slammiversary. So I think it's going to be the biggest show. It's going to be the biggest show of the year. And unless they've still got all of these stars coming in and they've still got the relationship in October, obviously Bound for Glory could be as big. But I just feel that everything's going to peak around Slammiversary time. So that's interesting when it comes to Impact Wrestling's plans for Kenny Omega. Now, we don't know when this World Championship reign for Kenny Omega is going to end. Again, my theory is that it's either Slammiversary or Bound for Glory. I think, again, everything with the Kenny Omega, how long this title reign lasts in terms of Impact, depends on how long he continues to be the AEW World Champion. If he's the AEW World Champion at Slammiversary in July, I don't see him dropping the title, because I don't see the AEW World Champion doing a clean job for an Impact Wrestling talent on an Impact Wrestling pay-per-view. Now, I know people might roll their eyes and shake their heads going, oh, he should, it's good business, but at the end of the day, AEW are lending their World Champion to Impact Wrestling. It doesn't benefit them to be putting over another talent from a smaller company. It just doesn't. It doesn't make any sense, and I can't imagine that AEW would agree to do that. So I think it all depends on when Kenny Omega drops the AEW World Championship. If he drops the AEW World Championship in, say, May, at Double or Nothing, that changes things, because then he can do a clean job for whoever in Impact Wrestling, and it doesn't make AEW look as bad because their world champion just lost to a rival promotion's star on their program. That doesn't look good. So I think that's why I say I think it'll probably be October. That's why I think it'll probably be Bound for Glory. But look, in the world of pro wrestling, don't we know it? So much can change in such a short period of time. So anything can happen, and that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing to keep guessing. It's not a bad thing to be trying to figure out what's going on. It's not a bad thing to be trying to predict things and see what's happening in the future. And it's not a bad thing to be asking questions about it. So I'm all for it. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the main event for Under Siege being announced last night on Impact Wrestling, and also the update on Impact Wrestling's plans for Kenny Omega as the Unified Impact World Champion? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go to the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.